Now, there were two of our students who asked some very interesting questions. I'll start with a somewhat easier question. Easier not because it's necessarily less deep, but simply because it's it has less of a philosophy to it, so to speak. All right, let me just explain to you. These were the questions. Um, the person wanted to know what the concept of a mitzvah is. What is a mitzvah or mitzvot in the plural? Mitzvah in the singular, mitzvot in the plural, which we would translate into commandments, commandment or commandments. Now, everybody knows about the Ten Commandments. That's no secret. But the truth is, there is, in the Torah itself, there's actually 613 commandments. The Ten Commandments is sort of a general rule book, a general guide. But the 630 are much more specific. And of those 613 commandments, there's actually 248. Thank you, Wendy. The 248 positive commandments. What is a positive commandment? A positive commandment means a commandment to do something of one sort or another. It's 248 positive commandments, which corresponds to the 248 limbs of the body. Now, you might think that that's kind of weird. When we mean limbs, we don't mean just the external limbs like the forearm and the upper arm and so on and so forth. But we mean basically all the joints of the body. All the joints of the body. In other words, for example, if you take a person's hand, like the hand. Now, the word for hand in Hebrew is yad. As you probably know, every word in Hebrew has a numerical value. So the word yad has a numerical value of 14. And that's because there are 14 sections in the hand. All right, so what does that mean? 14 sections in the fingers. So there's 3 sections in each of the fingers and 2 sections in the thumb. That's 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 in the thumb is 14, equals the word yad. So there's many more, each one of those is counted as a limb. Each one of the vertebrae is counted as a limb. Each one of the internal organs is counted as a limb. Limb is a loosely defined word in this particular case. It doesn't mean a limb in the normal sense of the word. But in any event, there's 248 body parts corresponding to 248 positive commandments. And therefore, there is actually a work, Kabbalistic work, called Sefer Haredim, where he makes these correspondences between the various mitzvot and the various parts of the body. But that's only 248 mitzvot, and then there's 365 prohibitions, or the 365 negative mitzvot, preferably called prohibitions, things that you're not allowed to do. For instance, things that you're not allowed to do, for example, eating shellfish or eating milk and meat together, seems to be pretty mundane things to a certain extent. Obviously, things like murder and incest and the big ones, but some of them seem to be fairly mundane. And these 365 correspond to the 365 days of the year in the solar year, and also correspond. Oh, 2 people in the waiting room. Oh man, I'm sorry about that. Admit all. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, sorry. I don't know why the waiting room is not. We usually disable the waiting room. It's not able to be disabled today for some reason. I have to find out from Zoom what's going on. So I wasn't keeping you out of the class deliberately. Okay, so again, there's 248 positive commandments, actions that we're supposed to take, 365 negative commandments or prohibitions that correspond to 365 days of the year, but they also correspond to 365 channels and sinews and veins and arteries and so on and so forth in the body. Therefore, it kind of follows that when the person transgresses, let's say, one of the prohibitions, or if a person fails to fulfill one of the positive commandments, that part of the body could be, after a while, could be affected, starts to atrophy, because the spiritual energy which animates it and which brings it to, gives it life, is possibly no longer there, and therefore illness can result. Okay, so that's the concept of what a mitzvah is. A mitzvah, again, is a commandment. Now, of the mitzvot, there are only 7 mitzvot, 7 commandments, which are called the Noahide commandments, which apply to everybody, which apply to everybody in the world. The 7 Noahide laws, or the 7 Noahide commandments, have to do with idolatry and murder and incest and so on and so forth. Those apply to everybody. The 613, much more detailed mitzvot, only really apply to Jewish people, but that was part of the covenant. That was an agreement, so to speak, that we made. And therefore, we're obligated in all of these things. Now, today, because we don't have the temple, a very large number, the temple in Jerusalem, a very large number of these commandments we can't actually fulfill, because we simply don't have a lot of them have to do with the temple and temple service and so on and so forth. A lot of them are based on things that go on in the temple and so on, depend on the temple. And therefore, a lot of them we can't do, but there's still plenty left. Fulfilling a mitzvah, therefore, the act of a mitzvah would be, for example, let's take an example, would be observing the Sabbath. Observing the Sabbath means there's certain types of work that we are not allowed to do, and it's a day of spiritual elevation, and we have to sanctify the Sabbath. So that has to be one day of the week which we sanctify, and we sanctify it by blessing it, and there's extra prayers and Torah reading and so on and so forth. And it is you could say, perhaps a particularly beloved commandment, because it's just a whole different headspace on the Sabbath. So the act of a mitzvah, therefore, could be something as refraining from doing certain types of work on the Sabbath, but it could also be something in a more positive sense, one of the 248 positive commandments, like, for example, wearing what's called phylacteries. Phylacteries, tefillin. Tefillin are 4 sections of parchment enclosed in leather box that are put on the head and on the arm. Let's see if I can actually show you an example of tefillin. Let me see here. And that would be, yeah. All right. Here we go. Let me share screen, and you will see shortly. Now, I'm not going to watch the whole thing because it's 5 minutes long, but here's someone wearing tefillin on the arm, right? Tefillin on the arm. And then there's tefillin
Hi, welcome to Jewish.tv DIY. Today we're going to learn how to put on tefillin.
All right, so as you can see, he's putting them on the arm, and then there's tefillin that go on the head. Oh, you see on the head.
For all Jewish men and boys from
Okay, so I guess you get the idea. That is the mitzvah, for example, of tefillin. Now, there are different mitzvahs in different categories. There's mitzvahs that have to do with action. There are mitzvot that have to do with speech. And there's mitzvot that have to do with thought. In other words, the commandments occupy the area which is called the garments of the soul. There's the soul itself with its inner structure of the 10 sfirot, or the 10 powers of the soul. And then there's what's called the garments of the soul. In other words, the way the soul expresses itself and interacts with the world. These are called the garments of the soul: thought, speech, and action, or thought, speech, and deed. Some of the mitzvot have to do with thought, in other words, with meditation or with understanding, consciousness. Others have to do with speech, study. Usually, study is out loud. And usually, study is done in partnerships. It's not done on your own. It's done in partnership. You sit and you discuss and you argue and you thresh things out with your study partner. And then there are those things that are physical mitzvot. In other words, you do them with your body, like putting on the tefillin and so on and so forth. Now, all of these also have kavanot. They have spiritual intentions that are laid out in the writings of the Kabbalists, particularly the Arizal, but the Zohar, of course. And the most influential ones are the ones from the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria. And the intentions are what actually brings one's consciousness to a higher level. Or if you want to say it somewhat differently, you could say that the soul becomes imbued with transcendent light through fulfilling the mitzvot. And when one is doing a mitzvah or fulfilling a commandment properly, that is an opportunity for dveikut. Dveikut, this was another part of one of the questions that was asked. How does it possibly result in dveikut? Dveikut means cleaving. When the mind or the heart or one's action, in other words, the mind, the emotions, and one's actions actually cleave to God. And this is a fundamental focus of Hasidic teachings, the concept of dveikut, where one cleaves to the object of one's focus, one's meditation. In other words, cleave to God, basically. And that can lead one up to an incredibly high level. It said with the Baal Shem Tov, would be in a state of dveikut. You could remain in a state of dveikut for days on end, and nevertheless function completely accurately, completely normally and naturally in the world. He wasn't like secreted away and hidden away, and he was acting in the world, but nevertheless in a state of tremendous dveikut. Obviously, this is only possible for the highest of souls. You can barely hear. Oh, I'm sorry. Better now? Sorry about that. I think my microphone was further away than it should have been. Okay, let me just see here. 1 second. Audio settings. Let me just see if maybe. No, the volume should be good. Output level. Yeah, let me just. Okay. That should be better. Okay, that should be better. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so that is the concept of mitzvot. Are there different degrees of mitzvot? Yes, there are different degrees of mitzvot. From a certain point of view, all mitzvot are the will of the Creator, the will and the wisdom of the Creator, all of them. And therefore, the sages tell us, do not weigh up which mitzvot are more important, which are less important, but whatever comes to your hand, that's what you do. It's not a matter of only going for the big things. It's a matter of fulfilling whatever you can in in normal life circumstances. But nevertheless, there's some mitzvot that are tremendously important, and the sages weigh up which are the greatest of the mitzvot, and amongst them is Torah study and meditation and prayer and so on. But in any event, there are different degrees. I just don't want to get into it now. It's too much of an esoteric subject. But yeah, okay. So that is the first question. Then there was a second question. The second question was a rather deep question from the point of view of it requires some prior philosophical understanding. All right, let me explain what I mean. Let me first tell you what the question is. In the world of Asiya, that's the lowest world. There's basically 5 worlds, or you might call them 5 levels of divine revelation, or you could call them also, they correspond to 5 levels of consciousness, 5 levels of soul. The world of Asiya is the lowest of the worlds. It's the world of action. There's the world of Asiya and the world of Yetzirah, the world of formation. The world of Bria is the world of creation. The world of Atzilut, the world of emanation. And then the world which is called Adam Kadmon, the primordial divine image, the primordial projected divine image. Okay, so in the world of Asiya, now all of these are simultaneous. They don't like come one after the other. They all exist simultaneously, but they're all like different levels. I suppose you could say like different levels of a building, although that would not be quite correct, because it's not that they're just different levels. The higher the world, the more it encompasses. In other words, the world of Bria, for example, encompasses the world of Yetzirah and Asiya. The world of Atzilut encompasses all 3 worlds below it, but in a much higher form. So what I mean by that, for example, let's say, it's an example that I've used probably too often, but in a very practical and very concrete sense, let's say you have 2 apples plus 2 apples equals 4 apples. You want to teach a child how to count. So 1 apple plus 1 apple, 2 apples, 2 plus 2 equals 4 apples. And you teach them using physical things. But eventually, you'll be able to teach a child that 2x plus 2x equals 4x. It's 2 anything. It doesn't have to be apples or pens or cups or books or whatever it is. It could be anything. So that formula 2x plus 2x equals 4x is a higher level formula than 2 apples and plus 2 apples, because the apples are tied down to these specific apples, whereas 2x is any 2 things plus any 2 things. Okay, so that's sort of the concept of a higher world. Now, we're not suggesting that the world of Yetzirah is a world of mathematical formulas or something like that. It's just to give an idea of something that's more abstract. So the higher the world, the more abstract it becomes. And when I say abstract, I mean abstracted from physicality, from materiality. It becomes a world of the world of Atzilut, for example, is a world of divinity. It's a world of divine revelation. All of the prophets received their revelation from the world of Atzilut, clothed within the world of Bria or the world of Yetzirah, or even in the world of Asiya. Moses was on the world of the level of Atzilut, and some of the great sages, the great Kabbalistic sages, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai and others, they had their consciousness was in the world of Atzilut or beyond. Okay, so the question arose about the world of Asiya, where the light of God is the most hidden of all the worlds. In fact, the word world in Hebrew is olam, O-L-A-M, the word olam, which comes from the word he'elem. He'elem means concealment, right? So the word olam means the world itself means a concealment. It means a concealment. So there's progressive concealment of godliness and progressive revelation of physicality. So the lowest of all the worlds, the world of Asiya, is the most physical world, even though it's the spiritual paradigm behind the actual physical world, but it's the lowest of all the worlds where godliness is the most hidden. So this person asked the question, in our prayers, in the Shema prayer specifically, we reiterate the oneness of God. So the question arises, is there any less of godliness in a leaf than in a mountain? Or is there any less godliness in the world of Asiya than the world of Yetzirah or Bria or Atzilut or Aron Kadmon or beyond that? Now, obviously, this is not that is not the case. We're only talking about a level of concealment, not at different levels of godliness, but different levels of concealment of godliness. The higher the world, the more revelation. The lower the world, the less revelation to us. But there's no concealment from God, and therefore he would be the same. And of course, when I use the word he, we're not. It's just because of the limitations of the English language. It's not he or she. We're not talking about gender, but we're talking about essence. So the essence of God is the same everywhere. It's only the revelation. And we could understand it like this. In fact, the sages in the Talmud explain it the following way. They say that take a little drop of water and look at what that drop of water reflects. If it's your face or whatever it is, well, that drop of water reflects, let's say, your face completely, but very small. It's just a drop of water on the surface of on a surface, and it reflects your face completely and faithfully, but in a very small format. Take a lake, smooth, still lake, and look at your face in the lake, and the same face is reflected in the lake as well, except it's much bigger. So they say that they use this analogy to explain that it's only the appearance. The original thing is still the original thing. It's only that the appearance appears to be smaller, appears to be lesser, but in fact isn't actually. Okay. And therefore, the meditation, certainly the meditations favored in the Hasidic methodology, like to focus very much on the oneness of God, even in the physical world. In other words, even physicality itself is part of godliness. It's not something different. You could say it like this, that physicality is a particularly material algorithm in God's mind, so to speak. And the focus of the oneness of God is particularly important when looking at the finite, the most finite of all worlds, the one in which we live. Now, in order to be able to explain this a little bit more deeply, we could explain like this. There are actually two kinds of revelation. There's revelation which is limited, and there's revelation which is unlimited. Limited revelation is called Mamale Kol Almin, the light or the energy that fills the world, the worlds in the plural. And the lights are structured to not overcome and destroy the vessels which they illuminate. Now, lights and vessels are only obviously loosely used terminology. It's because we don't have any better way of explaining it. But the vessel is an analogy for limitation, whereas the light is an analogy for revelation. So when you get limited revelation, that would describe the world of Asiya, the lowest of all worlds. It's limited revelation. It's light within a vessel, but light within vessels, which is limited according to the ability of the vessels to receive. Now, once the vessels become more refined, they can receive a higher level of light, obviously. But there's another aspect of divine light, and that's called Sovev or Kol Almin, the enveloping or surrounding or transcendent light, which is not limited according to the ability of vessels to contain. These two forms of light, Mamale Kol Almin, the light which fills the worlds, and the light which transcends or surrounds, envelops all the worlds, also correspond to two levels of what's called two levels of knowledge. Now, again, knowledge is not a great translation of the term. You could probably, consciousness would be better. But there's limited consciousness, and there's consciousness which is awareness of the physical world within its limitations, or consciousness of the limited worlds. And then there's this sort of super consciousness, which is envelops or transcends, but contains all of the worlds within it. Both of those are true. One is called Dat Tachton. The first one is called lower consciousness, and the second one is called higher consciousness. Now, generally, we perceive things from the level of lower consciousness, from the level of consciousness which is called Da'at Tachton, from the level of consciousness which is limited according to the limitation of the lights within vessels. And we try to extrapolate from there to achieve a higher level of understanding. But just let me switch that phone off 1 second. Okay. Okay, so whereas the divine understanding of things, which is called Da'at Elyon, supernal Da'at, is Da'at on a which encompasses or which encompasses all of existence, higher consciousness, and encompasses all of existence, and is unlimited. So when we see things in a limited fashion, we're talking about Da'at Tachton. When we see things in an unlimited fashion, or when God sees things in an unlimited fashion, that's called Da'at Elyon. Now, there are amongst, busy night, there are amongst the sages and amongst the Kabbalists who focus very much on attempting to achieve Da'at Elyon. In other words, trying to incorporate the understanding, the way God sees things, the way God understands things into their own understanding. Now, this is not such an easy, path, as I'm sure you can imagine, but both of them are nevertheless. I'm sorry about this. All right, sorry about the disturbances, but yeah, okay. So that's the idea of that is the idea of the levels of consciousness. Now, to take it even one step further, the higher consciousness contains the lower consciousness. In other words, it's not the way we think about things is not hidden from the way God thinks about things. The way God thinks about things. In other words, He can see things from our point of view. We cannot always see things from His point of view, but He can see things from our point of view. Now, obviously, again, using this terminology of seeing things and points of view is not necessarily not. In fact, it's not correct. It's just a manner of speaking because we have no other words for it. But the higher consciousness includes the lower consciousness, and as long as the lower consciousness is matched to or parallels the higher consciousness, the person can actually get to a higher level of much higher level of understanding, a much higher level of insight, and so on. I hope that answers the question. But I think we're going to have to leave that for leave other things for next time now. Probably, I'm definitely thinking that for the next period of time, the classes will be structured around a piece from the Zohar. I'm thinking of that. If anyone has any particular interest in that, let me know. If not, if you think it's not, it's going to be too lofty for you, then we can do it another time. But that's my plan. Obviously, I'll explain and translate it and explain it and give you the insight. Just a little insight, the way the Zohar thinks about things. Zohar is a favorite book of mine. As you probably know, I wrote a compilation of commentary of the Zohar on the first few sections of the book of Genesis. I never got to finish it, but maybe one day. I'm busy doing, at the moment, Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, which itself is a very mystical work. And I'm doing the Zohar's commentary on the Song of Songs right now. So, oh, thank you, Hank. All right. Any other questions? You just bought it, yeah. All right, Ben. So, all the best, and I hope we'll see each other next week. And, hopefully. I don't see why not, but all right. We'll leave it at that. Good night. All the best.